At my parents' 40th anniversary dinner, my father raised his champagne, pulled my sister Chloe close, and beamed at the crowd. "Looking at her success today," he announced. "We really wish Chloe was our only child." My mother nodded in agreement while Chloe smirked at me. I did not shed a single tear. I just quietly set my water glass down, realizing it was finally time to destroy the $50 million empire I had built for them. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us now. Let's begin the story. My name is Anna Rose. I am 29 years old, and for as long as I can recall, I have existed entirely in the shadows of my own family. By day, I work as a senior software architect at OmniRoute Dynamics, a major tech firm here in Seattle. I have always preferred the predictable, quiet logic of writing code over the messy, irrational, and deeply unfair nature of human relationships. While others constantly seek the spotlight, I seek the absolute solace of a dark room, a glowing monitor, and intricate algorithms that actually make sense and reward hard work. The exact opposite of me is my older sister, Chloe. If you spend any time on social media, you have likely seen her face. She is a self-proclaimed, self-made millionaire entrepreneur and the highly visible, charismatic founder of Eden Hearth, a luxury furniture brand that aggressively markets itself as eco-friendly. Chloe is all bright smiles, meticulously curated aesthetic posts, and endless inspirational quotes about the grind of being a female CEO. She sells a lifestyle of effortless perfection and creative genius. But the harsh, unglamorous reality behind Eden Hearth is a dark secret that my family has guarded closely. Chloe might be the beautiful face of the brand, but I am its spine, its nervous system, and its brain. 5 years ago, when her little startup was collapsing under the massive weight of lost orders and chaotic logistics, I stepped in to save her. I single-handedly wrote the entire supply chain management system from scratch. I developed the custom shipping optimization algorithms that immediately slashed their overhead costs by 60%. I built the robust e-commerce platform that handles their massive influx of holiday traffic without crashing. And for 5 long years, I have maintained, updated, and debugged that entire complex ecosystem completely for free. When servers went down at 3 in the morning, it was my phone that rang, not hers. I was the invisible engine running 24 hours a day, keeping her fragile empire from crumbling into dust. My parents, Richard and Eleanor, proudly call themselves the primary angel investors of Eden Hearth. They are a constant fixture in local business magazines, always photographed standing proudly next to their golden child. In every single interview, they boast endlessly about Chloe's unparalleled creativity and her visionary approach to automated logistics. They conveniently omit the undeniable fact that Chloe does not even know how to reset her own admin password, let alone code a dynamic routing network. My parents have collectively decided to erase my contribution, treating my thousands of hours of unpaid technical labor as a basic familial obligation rather than the sole reason their initial investment of $200,000 did not evaporate in the first 12 months. The suffocating weight of this toxic dynamic reached its absolute breaking point on a crisp evening in late autumn. It was my parents' 40th wedding anniversary. To celebrate this milestone, they had rented out a breathtaking, exclusive private dining space at the very top of the Space Needle in downtown Seattle. The room was a masterclass in excessive, obnoxious wealth. Flashing camera lenses reflected off towering crystal centerpieces. Waiters floated seamlessly through the crowd, carrying silver trays of champagne that cost thousands of dollars per bottle. The restaurant floor slowly rotated, offering a stunning 360-degree view of the city skyline, while a string quartet played softly over the self-important chatter of Seattle's elite. I sat at a dimly lit table near the back, purposefully pushed into a corner away from the photographers. I was a silent ghost at my own family's grand celebration. As the evening progressed, the ambient noise settled down when my father tapped his silver fork against his crystal glass. The gentle chiming sound echoed through the luxurious hall, commanding absolute silence from the hundreds of wealthy guests. Richard walked to the center of the room. His chest puffed out with immense pride. He reached out and pulled Chloe tightly against his side. She was wearing a sparkling designer gown, glowing under the warm spotlights. My father raised his glass high into the air, looking out at the crowd with a wide, arrogant smile. "We are so incredibly blessed tonight," my father's voice boomed through the microphone, echoing off the glass walls. "To share 40 years of love, surrounded by such wonderful friends, but my greatest pride, my absolute joy, is standing right here beside me." He looked at Chloe, his eyes shining with a profound adoration he had never once directed at me. Then, he turned his gaze toward the back of the room, his eyes briefly finding mine in the shadows. His expression hardened into a look of sheer disdain. "Looking at her spectacular success today," he announced to the completely silent hall. "We really wish Chloe was the only child of this family." The entire room went dead silent. The air grew instantly thick, heavy with the deeply uncomfortable realization of what had just been declared on a live microphone. Guests awkwardly shifted in their seats, exchanging nervous glances. Beside my father, my mother Eleanor did not look shocked or embarrassed. Instead, she simply nodded in firm agreement, a serene smile resting on her face. Chloe turned to look straight at my dark corner, her lips curving into a slow, incredibly triumphant smirk. She had won. They had finally said the quiet part out loud. Sitting there in the shadows, I did not cry. My heart did not break. I felt no sudden rush of hot tears or overwhelming urge to scream at them. Instead, a terrifying, absolute calmness washed over my entire body. I looked at the three of them standing proudly under the bright lights, and I just quietly set my water glass down on the crisp white tablecloth. I did not throw my drink. I did not scream, cry, or demand an apology. Instead, I simply stood up, in the suffocating, dead silence of that massive dining hall. The thick wooden legs of my chair scraped violently against the polished hardwood floor. The harsh, grating sound ripped through the room like a gunshot, shattering the fragile tension. Hundreds of eyes snapped toward my dark corner. The string quartet had completely stopped playing. My father's arrogant smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but I did not look at him. I did not look at my mother's serene mask or my sister's triumphant smirk. I kept my posture perfectly straight, my expression entirely blank, and I turned my back on them. I navigated through the sea of horrified, whispering guests, my heels clicking rhythmically on the floor. I walked straight to the glass elevator, pressed the call button, and waited in total silence as the doors opened. I stepped inside, turned around, and watched the doors slide shut, cutting off the view of my family forever. The rapid descent down the tower took exactly 41 seconds. When I stepped out of the lobby and into the dark streets, the biting, cold wind of Seattle slammed into my face. I paused on the sidewalk, taking a deep breath of the freezing air. For 29 years, I had been conditioned to believe that this hollow ache was normal, that if I just worked harder, gave more, and stayed quietly in the background, they would eventually see my value. But standing there under the glowing streetlights, I realized I felt absolutely zero heartbreak. The sadness was entirely gone. In its place was a terrifying, crystal clear, and brutal rationality. I was not a daughter. I was a free resource. They were not a family. They were a deeply entrenched emotional cancer, a parasite that had been feeding on my intellect and energy for half a decade. And the only logical protocol for dealing with a parasite is a complete surgical extraction. I hailed a cab and went straight back to my apartment. I walked past the kitchen, turned on the lights in my home office, and sat down at my workstation. I woke up my 3 monitors. The familiar, comforting glow of complex code washed over my face. I brought up the master dashboard for Eden Hearth. Green lights blinked steadily across the screen. indicating that all global servers were running perfectly. Thousands of active users were currently browsing the catalog, adding items to their virtual carts, generating thousands of dollars in revenue every single minute. I accessed the foundational architecture of the system. I pulled up the original legal documents I had drafted 5 years ago when I first built this massive digital machine, because they had viewed my work as basic, unpaid family labor. They had never bothered to hire a corporate lawyer to draft a formal transfer of ownership. They thought of me as their personal IT support, not a software architect, because of their sheer arrogance, the core source code, the proprietary routing algorithms, the entire back-end database structure, and the underlying intellectual property license did not belong to Eden Hearth. They belonged solely and legally to me. Chloe was essentially driving a high-performance sports car, entirely unaware that I owned the engine, the tires, and the road it was driving on. Beside my keyboard, my phone began to vibrate violently. It danced across the hard wood of my desk, lighting up with a rapid barrage of text messages. I picked it up. There were 14 new messages from my mother and sister. I scrolled through them, searching for any sign of remorse. There was none. None of them contained a single ounce of regret for my father's public, humiliating declaration. "You are so incredibly selfish," my mother wrote. "Walking out like that and making a huge scene. You embarrassed us in front of the board members." "Grow up," Chloe's text read. "You always have to ruin my night because you are jealous of my success. Fix the inventory glitch on the site before you go to sleep. By the way." I stared at the glowing screen, marveling at the sheer, unadulterated audacity. I did not type a reply. I did not try to explain my feelings. I simply pressed the power button and shut the phone off completely, tossing the useless piece of metal into my desk drawer. I opened my encrypted email client and drafted a new message to my personal corporate attorney. I left the body of the email entirely blank. In the subject line, I typed 3 simple words: "Activate revocation clause." I hit send. The gears of their destruction were now officially in motion. The next morning, I logged into the OmniRoute Dynamics employee portal and submitted a formal request for a 2-week paid leave of absence. It was approved automatically by the human resources system. I packed a single, small black suitcase with my essential clothes and my primary laptop. By the time the sun fully rose over the Seattle skyline, I was already in a taxi heading toward the airport, disappearing from the city without leaving a single digital or physical trace behind. 4 hours after leaving my apartment, my flight touched down in Austin, Texas. The blinding, relentless sun and dry heat were a sharp contrast to the cold dampness I had left behind. I was not here to hide. I was here to see Margaret. Margaret was my mother's older biological sister, a ruthless, wildly successful venture capitalist who had severed all ties with my parents exactly 15 years ago. She was the only person in our entire bloodline who possessed the clarity to see through the suffocating, pretentious facade my mother and father had meticulously built. I took a private car to her sprawling modern mansion nestled in the affluent hills overlooking the city. Huge floor-to-ceiling windows bathed the interior in harsh, unforgiving daylight. There were no soft corners here, only sharp lines, glass, and steel. Margaret was waiting for me in her home office. She did not offer me a tearful embrace or a suffocating display of pity. Instead, she listened in absolute silence as I calmly laid out the events of the previous night, the dinner, the toast, and my subsequent departure. When I finished, Margaret walked over to a crystal decanter, poured a generous measure of neat bourbon into a heavy glass, and handed it to me. She leaned back against her mahogany desk, her piercing blue eyes locking onto mine. "Drink that," she commanded softly. "You need to understand something right now. They did not raise you, Anna. They have just been bleeding you dry." It was the most validating sentence anyone had ever spoken to me. But Margaret was not a woman who stopped at emotional validation. She operated in the aggressive, high-stakes world of corporate finance, and she immediately viewed my situation not as a family drama, but as a hostile business environment that required a tactical response. Let us see what is really going on behind their little curtain, Margaret said, pulling out her laptop and making a series of rapid phone calls to her extensive network of financial analysts and private investigators. Over the next 48 hours, sitting in that sun-drenched office, Margaret unraveled a financial reality so shocking it left me speechless. Through her deep industry connections, she bypassed the glossy magazine covers and accessed the actual financial heartbeat of my parents' estate. My mother and father were not wealthy angel investors. They were completely broke. To fund Chloe's lavish, self-proclaimed millionaire lifestyle, the expensive public relations agencies, the designer wardrobes, and the massive warehouse leases for Eden Hearth, my parents had secretly taken out a second and third mortgage on their Seattle home. Worse, they had entirely liquidated their retirement funds. They were drowning in massive, high-interest debt, keeping the company afloat entirely on borrowed money and the illusion of success. But that was not the most dangerous revelation. Margaret slid a confidential dossier across the desk toward me. "Look at this," she instructed, pointing a manicured finger at a highlighted paragraph. "Eden Hearth is currently in late-stage acquisition talks. A massive retail conglomerate is preparing to buy your sister's company for $50 million. I stared at the numbers printed on the page, the blood rushing in my ears. If this monumental deal went through, my parents and Chloe would instantly clear their massive debts. They would pocket tens of millions of dollars and walk away as conquering heroes. But the most horrifying part was my own fate. The purchasing conglomerate was buying the company assuming they owned the supply chain architecture. Once the ink dried, my family would vanish with the cash, and I would be legally chained to a massive corporate entity, forced to endlessly maintain the complex code I wrote, or face catastrophic lawsuits from a billion-dollar legal department when the system inevitably crashed. They were planning to sell my brain to the highest bidder without giving me a single cent, leaving me trapped in a permanent cycle of corporate slavery. A cold, dangerous anger finally ignited in my chest. I looked up at my aunt. "We are not just going to stop helping them," Margaret stated, a predatory smile forming on her lips. "We are going to let the brutal laws of the capitalist machine swallow their arrogance whole." Margaret immediately mobilized her resources. By the end of the day, her sprawling living room had been transformed into a war room. She hired a team of top-tier corporate litigation attorneys, the kind of aggressive Texas lawyers who dismantled Fortune 500 companies for a living. They pored over my original server logs, my code repositories, and the digital footprints proving my sole authorship of the platform. The lead corporate attorney, a sharp man in a pristine gray suit, looked up from his files and grinned. "Your intellectual property is ironclad. Your sister never registered a single copyright for the software. The moment you pull the plug, they own nothing but empty warehouses and a catchy logo. We will build a fortress around you so thick they will not even be able to serve you a piece of paper." I sat back in the leather chair, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. We spent the rest of the week drafting the exact legal mechanisms of their destruction. I was no longer the silent, forgotten child hiding in the shadows. I was the absolute owner of the very thing keeping them alive, and I was about to teach them the true cost of my unpaid labor. Exactly 3 days before the massive $50 million acquisition presentation was scheduled to take place, I sat down at the heavy mahogany desk in Margaret's Texas office. My hands hovered perfectly still over the mechanical keyboard. On my massive high-definition monitor, the live feed of Eden Hearth's global server infrastructure pulsed with a healthy, steady green rhythm. Thousands of digital packets were flowing every second, representing thousands of dollars moving smoothly into my sister's bank accounts. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the cool air-conditioned breeze of the room against my skin. With a single, decisive keystroke, I executed the master override command. I officially terminated the security certificates and permanently revoked the proprietary licensing access for my entire logistics algorithm. I watched closely as the vibrant green lines on the screen abruptly froze. Then, one by one, the indicators flashed a harsh, glaring red. The digital heartbeat of my sister's fraudulent empire flatlined instantly. I calmly closed my laptop, walked over to the large bay window, and watched the peaceful Austin sunset, feeling lighter than I had in 29 years. More than 2,000 miles away in Seattle, the devastation was instantaneous and absolutely catastrophic. Through the isolated back-end monitoring tools I still possessed, I watched the chaos unfold in brutal real time. Chloe's entire supply chain paralyzed within seconds. The automated warehouse routing system, which had been seamlessly directing forklift operators and managing heavy freight shipments across 5 different states, went completely blind. Critical shipping manifests evaporated into thin air, leaving warehouse managers staring at blank screens. Customer payment gateways crashed violently, trapping tens of thousands of dollars in pending transactions suspended in a digital void. Within the very first hour of the outage, the automated customer service portal was completely overwhelmed by thousands of furious buyers demanding immediate refunds for expensive orders that had suddenly vanished from the tracking interface. The perfectly engineered logistics machine that I had built with my own hands had been reduced to a massive heap of useless, expensive digital scrap metal. The emotional fallout reached my newly secured digital firewall almost immediately. Since I had abandoned my old physical phone in my desk drawer back home, Margaret's private security team had routed all my incoming communications to a highly encrypted cloud server. I sat in a comfortable leather armchair, slowly sipping a glass of iced water, and listened to the audio recordings of Chloe's frantic voicemails. Her tone shifted wildly, painting a vivid picture of her rapid psychological decline. The first few messages were dripping with her usual arrogant, condescending authority. "Anna, the main dashboard is glitching again. Fix it immediately. I have a major podcast interview in an hour," she demanded, sighing heavily into the microphone. By the 10th voicemail, the entitled demands had devolved into hysterical, breathless screaming. "Where are you? The entire Seattle warehouse is on lockdown. Answer your phone right now. You stupid girl. We are losing hundreds of orders." By the 30th message, left late in the middle of the night, the sheer, paralyzing terror had finally set in. Her voice was trembling uncontrollably, entirely broken. She was openly sobbing, begging me to just log in for 5 short minutes to save her company, promising she would pay me whatever I wanted. I deleted the audio files without a single shred of hesitation or pity. When her pathetic begging failed, my parents stepped in, and the intimidation tactics began. Using anonymous alternate accounts to bypass the blocks I had set up, my parents bombarded my professional email inbox with furious legal threats. My father typed lengthy paragraphs in all capital letters, aggressively warning me that he had already contacted the local police department. He claimed he was preparing to sue me for millions of dollars for the malicious sabotage of corporate property and gross negligence. He promised to completely ruin my professional reputation, swearing he would use his high society connections to make sure I never worked in the technology industry ever again. Margaret's lead corporate attorney found this display of arrogance incredibly amusing. Sitting across the room from me, he took off his glasses, polished them slowly with a silk cloth, and smiled like a predator cornering its prey. He hit send on our official legal response. He replied directly to my father's threatening emails with a single, highly detailed legal document. It was the original free software licensing agreement from 5 years ago. Attached prominently on the very last page was the undeniable electronic signature of Chloe herself. She had been so incredibly eager to play the glamorous role of the visionary founder, so utterly careless with the boring technical details she felt were beneath her, that she had signed the binding contract without ever reading a single paragraph. The legal document stated explicitly, in bold legal print, that I retained complete, absolute ownership of the source code. Furthermore, it outlined that I possessed the unilateral right to revoke the platform license at any given time, for any reason, without providing any prior notice whatsoever. My father's empty threats of a massive lawsuit vanished into thin air the exact moment he read those words. He finally realized I was not a rogue, disgruntled employee he could bully into submission, I was the landlord of their entire existence, and I had just evicted them onto the street. The internal corporate collapse quickly bled out into the unforgiving public eye. Major social media platforms began buzzing with widespread, malicious rumors that Eden Hearth was nothing more than a giant, sophisticated scam. Popular lifestyle influencers who had previously praised the brand for its visionary efficiency were now posting angry, viral videos about missing luxury furniture and completely unresponsive customer service representatives. Financial journalists caught wind of the catastrophic system failure and started digging. During an impromptu press ambush outside her corporate headquarters, a desperate financial reporter shoved a microphone directly into Chloe's face, asking her to explain the technical nature of the severe database outage. The self-proclaimed technology visionary stammered nervously, sweating under the camera lights, entirely unable to string together a single coherent sentence about how her own company's routing protocol actually functioned. The flawless, self-made millionaire businesswoman facade began to violently crack and shatter under the intense public pressure. Back in Seattle, sheer panic consumed my family. They frantically hired expensive private investigators to scour my empty apartment, my usual coffee shops, and the entire OmniRoute Dynamics office building, desperately trying to drag me back by my hair to fix their massive mess. It was entirely useless. I was a ghost. With the massive $50 million acquisition deal hanging by a rapidly fraying thread, they were definitively backed into a corner with no way out. Instead of admitting defeat and canceling the meeting, my parents and Chloe made a reckless, completely delusional gamble. They decided to hide the catastrophic reality of the system failure from the buyers. They packed their custom-tailored suits, grabbed their useless leather briefcases, and prepared to walk into the final negotiation room. They were blindly hoping they could use Chloe's practiced charisma, fake smiles, and sweet-talking skills to trick the retail conglomerate into signing the binding acquisition papers before the entire digital infrastructure completely disintegrated into dust. The atmosphere inside the glass-walled boardroom on the 50th floor of the retail conglomerate headquarters was suffocating. I stood quietly in the pristine marble anteroom just outside the main doors, flanked by Margaret and our team of 3 heavily armed corporate lawyers. Through the thick, soundproof glass, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the massacre unfolding inside. Chloe, wearing a bright pink designer suit that looked entirely out of place in the cold, clinical corporate environment, was standing at the head of a massive mahogany table. She held a laser pointer in her violently trembling hand, frantically clicking through a slide deck filled with colorful but completely meaningless graphs. Sweat was visibly beading on her forehead, ruining her immaculate makeup. Behind her, my mother and father sat rigidly in their high-backed leather chairs. My father kept pulling at his silk tie. His face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson, while my mother stared blankly at the polished wood in front of her. They were desperately trying to project an aura of wealthy confidence, but to anyone with eyes, they looked exactly like what they were, cornered animals entirely out of options. Sitting opposite them was the acquisition board, a row of 6 executives in dark, severe suits. At the very center sat the lead representative of the conglomerate, a sharp-featured, silver-haired man who exuded absolute authority. He was not looking at Chloe or her brightly colored presentation. His cold, calculating eyes were fixed solely on a thick black folder resting on the table in front of him. Chloe was in the middle of a frantic, breathless sentence about brand synergy and lifestyle marketing when the lead executive simply raised a single hand. The gesture was small, but it instantly commanded the entire room. Chloe snapped her mouth shut, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. The silence that followed was agonizing. The executive slowly opened his black folder, adjusted his silver-framed glasses, and looked up at my sister. His voice, when it finally broke the silence, was dangerously calm and precise. "Ms. Chloe," he began, ignoring her carefully crafted brand pitch entirely. "Our internal engineering and due diligence teams conducted a final stress test on your digital infrastructure this morning. They discovered that your entire technological core has been locked behind an encryption wall we cannot bypass. Furthermore, our legal department has just verified the registration of the underlying source code. How do you explain not owning your company's only money-making engine? Chloe froze completely, all the color drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly and pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a pathetic, raspy squeak came out. She dropped her laser pointer. It hit the mahogany table with a loud clatter and rolled onto the floor. She frantically looked back at our parents, her eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated panic. My father, ever the arrogant patriarch, forcefully pushed his chair back and stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket, pasting a sickeningly fake, reassuring smile onto his face. He leaned his hands on the table, trying to dominate the space through sheer physical presence. "Gentlemen, please," my father chuckled, a hollow, desperate sound. "There is absolutely no need for concern. What your engineers experienced is merely a minor maintenance error. It was caused by a highly incompetent, disgruntled IT employee who handles our basic server upkeep. We are already in the process of formally firing her and transitioning to a much more reliable service provider. I assure you, the system will be back online and fully operational before the end of the business day." It was the final, undeniable proof of their delusion. Even now, standing on the edge of utter ruin, they still viewed me as nothing more than the help, a disposable tool to be blamed and discarded. I looked at Margaret. She gave me a single, firm nod. The lead attorney pushed the heavy brass handles, and the massive double doors of the boardroom swung open with a resounding, heavy thud. I stepped into the room. I was no longer the quiet, invisible girl hiding in the dark corners of their extravagant parties. I was wearing a razor-sharp, charcoal gray tailored suit, my posture perfectly straight, my expression an impenetrable mask of absolute control. The rhythmic clicking of my heels on the hardwood floor echoed loudly across the silent room as Margaret and the lawyers fanned out behind me like a highly disciplined military unit. The physical reaction from my family was instant and visceral. Chloe let out a genuine shriek of terror and physically backed away, hitting the presentation screen behind her. My mother gasped, covering her mouth with her trembling hands. My father's fake smile completely melted off his face, replaced by a look of sheer, paralyzed horror. His jaw actually dropped open, his eyes bulging as if he were looking at a ghost. I did not stop until I reached the exact center of the long table, standing directly across from my trembling father. I reached into my leather portfolio, pulled out the heavy stack of original intellectual property patents and the signed, irrevocable revocation documents. I lifted the stack high in the air and slammed it down onto the glass surface of the table with a violent, satisfying crack. The sound made Chloe flinch. I kept my hands planted on the table, leaning forward slightly. I locked my eyes directly onto my father's terrified face, refusing to let him look away. "This incompetent IT employee," I said, my voice ringing out clearly and flawlessly through the silent room, "is here to announce your company is actually just an empty shell?" My father started stammering, his hands shaking violently as he tried to formulate a sentence, but his brain had completely short-circuited. He looked from the legal documents to my face, the crushing reality of his total destruction finally setting in. Then, the ultimate twist of the knife occurred. The lead executive of the conglomerate did not look angry at the interruption. He did not call security. Instead, he calmly closed his black folder, stood up from his chair, and a warm, genuine smile spread across his face. He completely ignored my hyperventilating family, walked around the massive table, and extended his hand toward my aunt. "Margaret," the executive said warmly, grasping her hand in a firm shake, "it is an absolute pleasure to finally do business with you again." My family watched this exchange in completely shattered, mind-numbing disbelief. Chloe sank slowly into her chair, her perfectly styled hair falling into her tear-streaked face. The executive turned to look at my parents, his warm smile instantly vanishing, replaced once again by absolute corporate ruthlessness. "Did you honestly believe," the executive said, his voice dripping with profound condescension, That a global logistics conglomerate was willing to pay $50 million for a poorly managed secondary market furniture brand. We never cared about your cheaply made couches, your fake eco-friendly marketing, or your social media followers. We only ever wanted the proprietary routing algorithm, and since you do not own it, we have absolutely no use for you. Without breaking eye contact with my weeping sister, the executive picked up the massive, 200-page acquisition contract that my family had been desperately praying would save their lives. With a single, brutal motion, he ripped the front pages in half and tossed the shredded paper onto the floor like garbage. He then turned back to me, his demeanor shifting back to total respect. "Anna Rose," he said, producing a single crisp folder from his briefcase and sliding it across the table toward me. "My board is officially rescinding all offers to Eden Hearth. Instead, we would like to present a direct, exclusive purchasing agreement for the permanent transfer of your intellectual property and algorithms. Our initial offer is $40 million, deposited directly into your personal accounts, effective immediately upon signing." I heard my mother let out a loud, pathetic wail of pure agony from the other side of the room. My father collapsed into his chair, his head falling into his hands as the magnitude of what they had lost finally crushed him completely. They had traded a brilliant, loyal daughter for a fleeting illusion of fame, and in doing so, they had handed me the very weapon I used to completely obliterate them. I picked up the heavy silver fountain pen provided by the lead executive. The massive boardroom was so incredibly silent that the sharp scratching of the metal nib against the thick paper was the only sound in the air. I signed my full name across the dotted line, officially transferring the rights of my logistics algorithm and instantly securing my $40 million future. I placed the pen down on the glass table, picked up my copy of the contract, and turned to face my father. He was deathly pale, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair so tightly his knuckles were completely white. I looked him directly in the eyes, feeling absolutely nothing but profound closure. "Now your greatest wish has finally come true," I said, my voice smooth and completely void of any pity. "From this exact moment on, you only have one daughter." I did not wait for a response. I turned my back on them for the very last time. Margaret and our legal team followed closely behind me as I walked out of the glass doors, leaving the three of them completely broken and weeping amidst the shattered, worthless remains of their lifelong deception. The undeniable consequences of their actions arrived with brutal, unforgiving speed, without the massive financial bailout from the failed corporate acquisition, and entirely lacking a functioning back-end system to process any incoming sales. Eden Hearth completely collapsed. They officially filed for bankruptcy in less than one single month. Chloe was immediately buried under an avalanche of massive class action lawsuits from thousands of furious customers and angry wholesale partners. Her carefully curated social media accounts were permanently suspended and deleted for rampant commercial fraud. She went from portraying a glamorous, self-made millionaire to becoming a massive, highly publicized legal liability virtually overnight. Richard and Eleanor lost absolutely everything they had because they had foolishly leveraged their entire existence to fund Chloe's endless vanity project. The bank swiftly foreclosed on their lavish Seattle estate, completely unable to pay back their massive high-interest mortgage debts. They were violently evicted. They were forced to pack their remaining clothes into garbage bags and move into a run-down, rusted trailer park on the far industrial outskirts of the city, their wealthy, elite social circle, the exact same people who happily drank their expensive champagne at the top of the Space Needle, completely ostracized them. They were entirely abandoned. As for me, I bought a beautiful, sprawling luxury penthouse in downtown Austin. Early this morning, I stepped out onto my massive private balcony, feeling the warm Texas breeze against my skin. I held a hot cup of fresh coffee and watched the brilliant golden sunrise wash over the city skyline. My phone was resting on the glass table next to me. I had intentionally never blocked their phone numbers. I just kept the device completely on silent mode. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched the screen light up with yet another desperate, helpless incoming call from my mother. I did not reach for it. I simply watched the bright screen glow for a few long seconds, then fade back into total, peaceful blackness. I took a slow sip of my coffee and smiled brightly, knowing that I was finally permanently free. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Maya Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.